And without further ado, let me introduce the third plenary session speaker, Dr. Nira Rahman. Dr. Nira Rahman is an expert in educational design and student engagement in the arts, teaching innovation in the Faculty of Arts at the University of Melbourne. She's a recipient of the Dean's Award for her significant contribution to the student experience. Dr. Rahman is a senior fellow of HERTSA, which is the Higher Education Research and Development Society of Australia, and member of several multi-institutional international research groups. She is also a published author in Bangla and contributes regularly to the international media in both English and Bangla, exploring themes of culture, language, and identity. Dr. Nira Rahman's plenary session is titled Fostering Respect, Inclusion, and Diversity in Pedagogical Practices. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Dr. Nira Rahman. Dr. Rahman, over to you.
Thank you so much. It always feels really heartwarming when someone introduces that kindly. Thank you. Thank you for your kind introduction, Meg. But it's all right. Let's go to the session. I'll just share my screen. Just give me a second. Can you all see that? That's lovely.
Yes.
So today we will talk about fostering respect, inclusion, and diversity in pedagogical practices. No matter wherever you are in the world nowadays, in terms of the teaching and learning, we talk about, inclusion, diversity. These are quite a bit buzzwords, around the globe in terms of how we look at our student cohort and how diverse our students and even the teaching staff. But today I would like to look at it from a perspective that how we can bring those concepts in our pedagogical practices, what it even means to us in terms of the inclusion or diversity. And when we talk about respect, sometimes, and particularly in the society in Bangladesh, we feel that we are very respectful, or we sort of practice, or we are taught respect from very early age. But how we bring those notions, or do we at all bring those notions in our pedagogical practices, that is something we'll just explore and talk. And I'll share my thoughts and ideas, but I would really welcome your questions, your thoughts, and please feel free to share your ideas. While I'll be talking, I might not be able to check the chat and things like that, but Mehek, you are there, or others who are sort of moderating in. Please feel free to throw those questions at me, and if anybody wants to just click on your video and come up and ask questions in person, please do that, because on the online setting like this, I always feel that the human participation and the warmth we bring in our participation. So please feel free to ask questions, or if you kind of even want to differ with my ideas and things like that, please bring it on. Now, when we talk about, in this session, we'll try to look at what is respect, inclusion, and diversity, and why is it important, how we can include that, and for whom. So we'll look at these things, and discuss. Before even start all these very dry academic discussion, I actually don't want to do that, because we often in the academics presentation, things can be quite dry. But today we'll just talk about how we think. So it's about us. We'll come to that point in a minute. So before even going there, look at the sort of, the funny picture. And what I'm trying to bring it in here, that if you are blindfolded can you see none of these characters in the photograph, their eyes are open, so their eyes are kind of closed. So if they touch one part of elephant, they don't know it's an elephant, right? So they're just touching one part. And depending on which part you are touching, you feel, all right, it's like a big snake, or it's tree stump, it's a sheath of leather, or it can be a tiny sort of a mouse. So it's always it depends on us, that how we see the world, and our world is actually the world around us, and we see our world using our own glasses. For an example, I can see Arif Appa is wearing glasses. Don't get upset, Arif Appa, for putting you on the spotlight, because I can just see you on my screen. But and I'm wearing a pair of glasses. But if we think that we'll swap, none of us will be able to see things clearly. So we actually see the world the way we are trained, and we bring our experiences, we bring our perspectives when we look at the world. And that is something we need to really think and consider. And let's look at this. If and even if it is reality, the other one was a funny picture, right? Cartoon kind of picture. This one, think about if you are standing, if on my screen, the man who is, standing on the left, he's seeing there are 4 logs. And the man who is, standing on the right, he is looking at there are 3 logs. Now, which one is correct? If I ask you that question, none of it is wrong, right? None of them are wrong. Why? Because it's just the way they are, looking at the things. So when we talk about even reality, the reality is very subjective. Reality is where you are at and how you are looking at the world. And, it's the observation. If we talk about that, the observations are based on how we are trained to observe, or how we learned to observe things. And as teachers, you might agree with me, those who are teachers here, as educators, we actually bring our experiences into our teaching. We bring our perspectives into our teaching. So and even as students, so when we say that, oh, I'm bringing that, considering the reality, that your reality is your reality, because that's how you are looking at the world. So often I share that view because I talk and I work around identity, intersectional identity and positionality, and I often talk to my students or even my colleagues that our world views, our perspectives, even what we teach, the content, how we teach, the pedagogical practices, and for whom we are teaching, the way we look at our students, our audience, and how we sort of perceive our audience is based on how we learned to see the world. So it's very subjective and it's complex. And that is something we'll be talking today. Now, the word I used, as I might have picked it, it's positionality. So some of you know about it, for some of you, it might be a new word. But if you think about the word positionality, it has got position in it. And that's why I use that, the picture of a man standing, this side, looking at, there are 4 pieces of wood logs, and the other man positioned other side, having 3 pieces of wood logs, thinking. So, but in terms of identity literature and the pedagogical practices, positionality can be described very easily in a way that it talks to you, it tells you who are you and what is your lens. So bringing that perspective into pedagogical practices, often as educators, we think a lot about what we are going to teach, right? Content. And we think a lot about, all right, what are the assessments we'll be doing, how we can finish the content, and work really, really hard to develop innovative ideas, how we can engage our students and things like that. But often we don't think that how it is important to think of who we are and what are the lenses we are bringing into our classroom, because my lens might not be the same lenses my students are bringing. So when we are thinking that it is a really clear view, our students might be thinking, all right, okay, I don't even know what my teacher is talking about. And those who are teacher here, I'm sure we all experienced it many times, that you spend really hours after hours building a fascinating activity in class, thinking that, oh, my students are going to love it. And then you take it into class and you think, oh my God, it was one of the biggest flops. I'm sure we all experienced it. Why it happens? Because, you are using your lens, when you are developing that, and you are giving your lens to your students and they see everything fuzzy and blurry. So it's very important we talk about that in class and we bring that perspective in class. Now, I know we are all on online and we don't have much time, so I wouldn't go through really in depth with this activity, but I'll just give you a minute to look at that and think about that. Where do you see yourself? And see, it's an identity wheel. And there is an aspect of race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, religious and spiritual affiliation, age, physical, emotional development, ability and disability, the first language, national origin, sexual orientation, sex, gender, all these things. And these are, when you are thinking of Nira, the Nira, when I go and meet my friends, this is not the same Nira when I go to classroom, right? And this is not the same Nira when I'm a traveler somewhere else. Or so there are different facades of our identity, and some of the facades are more important to some of us than others. And for an example, for me, gender plays a very important role. And though I have been teaching for a very long time in Australian context, but I always tell my students that I bring my Australian Bengali-ness, in my classroom. So, and it's always funny that if you think about that, all of us here, I guess that most of us here speak Bengali. So when you are sharing a joke with your Bengali friends, if you exactly translate that joke in English, it wouldn't remain as a joke anymore, right? And so there are cultural nuances and different parts. So I'll just give you a minute to think about, in terms of you, that what is that what part of your identity you think people first notice about you, or your students notice about you, strongest effect on how you see yourself as a person, or the interaction with students or your colleagues and peers. So I'll just give you 1 minute to think. And in the meantime, if you have any questions about anything, please ask. All right. I'll go to the next one. Now, we started talking about positionality, right? So positionality is being aware of your personal identities and how they shape your worldviews. So if we go back really in here, different identities. So you are aware of that you have those different, identities, and how you interact with them. So often when we talk about identity, we use it is in singular, but we actually have different identities. And the intersectionality comes when, there are different social categories and how it intersects. Even the word intersectionality gives you an idea that if you think of intersection, where there are different types of thing matches. And often to my students I tell that, think about that we all have different facades of identity, and we just decide which one we'll be using based on the context. So the context is very important. So if we think our classroom is a microcosm of a society, we need to think of that how our diverse student group think about the positionality and intersectional identities of all of us bring in there. And one of the things I would love to bring it here, that often, and it's not only just in a Bangladesh context or in Australian context or in UK context or American context, often when we think about identity, we actually think that identity is just the way we look, that someone brown or white, or the African American, or the Asian people. Our diversity or identity is not just the way we look. So even in Bangladesh, a classroom in Bangladesh, where probably most of the students, if not all students, will speak in Bangla, all apparently will look similar, with a brown skin and South Asian typical sort of racial feature. That doesn't mean our classrooms are not diverse. So the diversity is not about, the way we look. So we'll come to that point in a minute. But this positionality and intersectionality is very important in terms of how we design our, the content, what we bring in there, and how we teach our students. And often we don't think about that. Now, let's explore positionality. So can you see that at the corner of the page, there is a sort of intersectional identity chart? It reminds us that as teachers, as students, or as practitioners, every one of us, we bring those intersectional identities wherever we go, whatever we do. So I will just give you a minute to look at the questions and just to think that if you are an educator and if you are a student, just please put the student instead of educator in these questions, that what parts of your identity have the strongest effect on how you see yourself as an educator, strongest effect on how others see you as an educator. So this is really interesting, because it's not just the way I see or I perceive about myself when I go to classroom or when I go to present in a conference. It's about how you all see me, or you all see you, or all the others see you. So the identity is not just about what you think about yourself. It's about how others perceive you. That is absolutely very important in terms of what we bring in our classroom or what we bring in our pedagogical practices, or teaching content, and how have your knowledge and worldviews been developed as an educator. And keep that in mind, that this is also informed or sort of built upon the way you learned to see the world. All right. So I always make fun with my students when we, in my identity class, because I teach identity. If I, for an example, before even starting the session, Dr. Shamsun Mortaja was telling me that, jokingly, that are you kind of matching your clothes with the slide color? Now, if I ask you what is the color of my jumper and my slide, you will all tell it's black, right? No doubt about it. However, let me put a spin in there. If I ask you, how do you know it's black? You will think, oh, we know because we know. I will say, stop for a minute and ask yourself again, how do you know it's black? You will say, oh, because we all know we were taught that it's black. All right. Now, one of you, if you say, no, 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 it's black, but then it's kalu in Bangla, right? And then somebody in, coming from other language background, they say, no, 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 it's not kalu, it's something else. And then these two people are fighting like the two men standing from different perspectives, looking at same logs. One is thinking 4, one is thinking 3. we so even that with the colors, what we think that we all know it's black, how do we know it's all black? Because that's the way we tuned our brain. We learned that it is black, and that is the lens we were given when we were growing up. So when we go to the classroom, we should not assume that all our students, even when we talk with our colleagues, we should not assume that all our colleagues will, sorry, look at black as a black. I'm just using black as a sort of, analogy. But this is something we need to think that the perspectives are really important. The context is really important. So even when we are talking about the content, teaching content, and we think that, oh, everybody studying English literature will know this. How do you know everybody know it? And how do you know everybody's knowing will match your knowing? And even when you go to a postgraduate class, thinking that, all right, it's a master's degree class, all my students will at least know this. How do you know they know it? And how do you know they know it the way you know it? And the moment you assume that you know they know it, that's the time the sort of communication or disconnection actually start happening. Do I make sense? Because the moment you think that, oh, everybody will know what I'm talking about, no, they don't. And remember that, yes, they might know what you are talking about, but is it the way you want them to know what you are talking about, or is it a different way they are perceiving what you are talking about? So it's all about perceptions. And particularly in liberal arts, social science, and humanities, 2 plus 2 is not always 4. And it's not always black or white. There are grays. All right. So that's something we really need to think about, that it's not only just the way we are bringing our identity or, the strongest effect on our identity, what are others seeing us and how they're seeing us. Now, this is a question I am not asking because it's online and I don't want any answer from you, but this is a question I'm actually posing to you all. And think about that when you next time design a course, or even design a smallest activity, or even asking a question to your student or other colleagues, that are you aware of your own cultural rules and biases? Have they ever influenced your teaching practices? Why am I asking these questions? Because it's funny enough, all of us all of us have got biases, right? But we always think that I am the only person who is very open, with no biases, everybody else has got biases, and we'll say, oh, these people are so biased, or these people are so, judgy, and things like that, while we all have biases. So even acknowledging that we have biases, and then asking us, that why we have these biases is absolutely very important, because again, our biases comes from, the glasses we were given, and the sense of who we are, what we are, and things like that. And, when we were growing up, we learned different stories about the world. All right, okay, fine. The Bengalis do this so good. We are the best in doing that. And then the more you grow and you travel around the world, you read other literature, you look, get to mix with others, and you start questioning, really, the Bengalis do it better and the best? How do we know? Things like that. The way our, even with our taste of, with food, or music gets, mature and different. So this is something we need to think that, our own cultural rules and biases, and that is very important. Even when you go to a classroom thinking that, oh, our classroom, everybody is there Bengali, or Bangladeshi, or things like that. But diversity is not just, the way we look and things. And that's exactly what we will be discussing now. That diversity is the what, and inclusion is the how. Many of you might be thinking, what is she talking about? Inclusion is the how and diversity is what? That's actually, that is something I will actually see, as a sort of educator, as someone who works in scholarship of teaching and learning, as a subtle practitioner for a very long time, that is how we look at the world, as how and what. Um, yes, good number. In the chat box, I can see the diaspora issue. That's a whole different thing. We'll come to that. But so looking at that, diversity. So think about that. Diversity does not mean as I said, the different way we look and things like that. The term actually represents a broad range of experiences, including socioeconomic background, upbringing, religion, the education, sexual orientation, neurodiversity. Often we don't think about those things. Disability, ability, life experience refers to a broad range of ideas and initiatives to create learning environments that are safe, inclusive, and equitable. And even in terms of the safe learning environment, how we sort of define the safety in the learning environment, that's also very important. And recognizing, fostering, and developing sensitivity to the needs of people in various identity categories are primary aims. Now, I will really ask you to think about the word sensitivity. It's different than being or feeling pity, or thinking that, oh, I'm really kind, I'm helping my students. Sometimes you need to be really thinking well and hard enough to be empathetic, but at the same time, not coming from the savior context that, oh, I'm helping them. Because as a teacher, the moment you come from a savior, positionality, your students will see that and they will not trust you. They will think that you are, their savior. Nobody wants a Masiha sort of, the savior teacher. Rather, they want someone who will understand where they are coming from, what they are bringing in class. And often, do we really think of what our students are bringing in class? How many times we think of, the cultural capital or the knowledge and the experiences our students are bringing in classroom? Yes, I understand. All the teachers around the globe, regardless, are time poor. Right? We all are running against the time. We have got so much to do, so less time. However, we need to work smarter than harder to find out how we can include that, perspective of what our students are bringing. And that would be the beginning of the creating safe and inclusive and equitable classroom and pedagogical practices. And that would make all of us sensitive. So being sensitive is not feeling pity for somebody else. Being sensitive is not feeling, oh, I'm really, really kind. So the moment you think that you are the kindest person in art, you have a bias and you are coming from sort of savior complex. Now, as I said, if you can remember that diversity is what and inclusion is how. You remember, right? We started talking about that. So if our classroom is diverse, and there is not if, every classroom is diverse, inclusion is a secret ingredient that makes the diverse workplace, be it a classroom or with your colleagues, innovative, profitable, and engaging. I'll just stop here and give a very simple analogy. Those who are aware of, the intercultural communication, because I teach that, and many of you might be aware of that. Often there is a sort of analogy used that, it's a melting pot, right? So we melt and, it's a melt. Our classrooms are the melting pot. Our societies are the melting pot. I have got really big reservation about that. Ask me what. Why? The moment you say that, our classrooms or our society is a melting pot, the moment you are doing that or saying that, actually you are asking every members of the society or your classroom, as I said, our classrooms are the microcosm of our society, to actually lose or discard their individual identity they're bringing into the classroom, their individual perspectives, positionality they're bringing into classroom. Because when they melt, you are becoming somebody else. So from today onwards, don't think that we want a melting pot in our classroom. Rather, make your classroom a fried rice or a salad where, if you feel like that you want a bit of a chicken, you can put it. If you think, no, I'll put it, make it as a vegetarian fried rice, do that. And your secret ingredients can be your different tomato sauce, or I love cooking. That's why I love using those analogies. Or, your bit of, different peppers or the black pepper or white pepper, bit of chili sauce, or your salad where every the cucumber, the tomato, the beetroot, the carrot, the lettuce all have their own sort of individuality, but then we use a very nice secret sauce, which we custom made for every classroom, and then make the salad. And the salad is crunchy, fresh, and nice, and that's appetizing for everyone. Do I make sense? So that is inclusivity, and the inclusivity should not be a sort of very generic, because every classroom is different. Every cohort is different. So our cucumbers or our choices of ingredients will be different. So when our ingredients are different, the secret ingredient, the binding sauce will be very, the tailored made. Do I make sense? So this is something we need to think about that. And inclusivity is a measure of culture. So I would say inclusivity itself is a culture that enables diversity to thrive and is about rewriting implicit bias and challenging the idea that different means inferior. So do not, do not, do not think if somebody is different in classroom, they are inferior. And do not try to be too kind to help them, because the moment you do that, you are actually coming from the savior complex and you are segregating them. So, think about that. If, you might have cucumber this much, you might have tomato this much, and you don't use green chili that much. This is this much, but this much green chili can actually help all these cucumber, and do that in the same way. So that's where we will come in a minute to talk about something else in terms of the equality and equity in a minute. So inclusive environment requires thoughtfulness and intention, and there is not any sort of magic wand or the magic sort of pill which can go everywhere. It's not like that. And I often make fun with my Australian colleagues or even my British colleague. I was talking to them saying that, in terms of the inclusivity, it's not the curry powder you use. For our curry, every curry has got different, spices. We don't use same curry powder for every curry, and that's why our each curry tastes different. So inclusivity is the same thing. It's not this, the generic curry powder available in the supermarket. So keep that in mind. Now, this is very important. We all should remember diversity does not always ensure inclusivity. So just because your students are diverse, that doesn't mean your classroom or your teaching practices or your content is inclusive. So think hard, think deep that what your diversity is doing. So look at that. Your diversity can be bringing exclusion, or it can segregate few of your students, or it can be grouping, the clustering the students, integration in very different ways, or it can be, the inclusion. So think about it and think about how you can sort of ensure that inclusivity. Now, we started talking about the intersectionality, how the intersectional approach can help diversity and inclusion. First, the biggest contribution it can make is the intersectional approach to diversity and inclusion is an and approach, not an or approach. So it's not about, black or white, red or green. It's about red and green and black and white. So it's not about cucumber or tomato or lettuce or beetroot. It's about cucumber, tomato, lettuce, and beetroot, and some feta cheese, and some, so all of these. And the amount of those are not same. So we'll come to that point in a minute. And it demands consideration of interweaving identity. And you remember the identity wheel I show you, the intersectional identity chart I show you. And I'm happy to work with any of you, share with you some of the ideas if you want to, bring those perspective in your class. But interweaving identities is very, very important aspect of bringing inclusion in class. And it should start from you as an educator. You need to think hard about what identity you are bringing in your classroom, because that will make you aware of how we are seeing the world, and talking about that with your student, that this is something I am doing it, and that's where my sort of positionality is, will actually help you to bring your vulnerability, and that vulnerability will actually make you sensitive rather than, being the savior. And intersectional lens forces us to dissolve the assumption that group identities create and recognize individuals as unique, multifaceted centers of experience. So rather than thinking our group of students as a group of students, think that they are all individuals. And often in the classroom, we don't do it. We think, all right, yeah, we have group of students. And so leveraging our diversity is very important, and it starts from recognizing the difference. So we first need to start that there is a diversity, and there is a differences, and then acknowledging the differences, and then understanding the differences, and then only you can address through your action. And that's where your pedagogical practices, even the way you design the content, is very important. And I often make that particular sort of, example. For an example, if you are teaching, uh, you know, say for an example, you are teaching English literature, and you are talking about, you are teaching James Joyce, and in his writing there are a lot of, the references from Dublin, and the those weather and those particular contexts. Now, if your student has never been there, never experienced that, their understanding is through literature, through books and things like that. So, and when you are imagining, your imagination might not, or must not, I would say rather, will match with somebody else, because our imaginations are very, very, very different, right? So, for an example, one of you in the chat box wrote about diaspora. I use that example for the diaspora and the children in the diaspora. Think about, even my daughter, who was born in Australia, grew up in there. If we talk about, can I use a single line in Bengali? That if we talk about Omolo dhobolo pale legeche mondo modhuro hawa. All right? Somebody like her who can speak Bengali very well, but has never, never experienced, the sky in the autumn, autumn sky in Bangladesh, and have never seen the beautiful, the blue sky, and then the Paltola Noka, and then I'm telling them, Omolo dhobolo pale legeche mondo modhuro hawa. Even if I translate that, it doesn't make sense to them in the way it makes sense to us. It makes sense to them, but in a different way. And that is very important to acknowledge that in our classroom, even in terms of, teaching literature, or teaching social science, or teaching political science, or even teaching anthropology. Do I make sense? So this is absolutely very crucial, that what we teach, how we teach. And this is why diversity and inclusion is very important, because inclusion actually brings the thoughts, ideas, and perspectives. Then we'll come to, diversity brings the multiple identities. We'll come to identity in a minute. All those actually contribute to the sense of belonging. And the sense of belonging is not just, the sense of belonging to a country or a society. It's the sense of belonging to the subject they are teaching. Or studying, or the sense of belonging, the way they are interpreting a particular task you give them as an educator. So that is very, very important, and sense of belonging is very important perspectives, or one of the outcomes we need to think of when we design a pedagogical practices. And inclusive pedagogy is very important in terms of examining personal experience, and that fosters engaged learning. And often in classroom, all of us as educator, we often sort of complain, or think that why our students are not engaging enough. And particularly I make joke that after COVID, the engagement, regardless where you teach, the engagement span is very different, the way we engage is very different. So the examine personal experience, question personal assumption, inquire things, practices, values around us, bringing our own voice, personal experience in terms of the institutional and societal process, connecting with that, and then critique. And critiquing is also very important. And critiquing is not criticizing. So that's also a very, very important thing we should remember. Now, that's where we have to bring the equality and equity. Now, equality means everyone is treated in the same way. But equity, recognizing that each person has different circumstances and we will cater them, we will cater our students in that way. Now, let me give you a very simple analogy. If I have a, big piece of cake, and that big piece of cake, I said that I'm a teacher that we really love to, I'm really a big believer of equality. So I'll give every student a same piece of cake. All right. So you have got 20 students in your class and you divide your piece of cake, 20 same pieces of cake, and you give it to your student. And then you found out after having the cake, one of your students became sick. Then you realize that particular student had diabetes. So that cake was harmful then to him rather than it was helpful. So that's exactly what I was trying to bring in, that it's about not giving your students the same thing, equal thing to everybody. Rather, it's the equity. You remember just with the salad example, I said that you can have this much of cucumber, this much of tomato, but you don't put this much of green chili or you don't put this much of cheese in there. Every ingredient has its own sort of amount, and equity is absolutely really important. What each person brings, the different circumstances and how they want that, how much they want it. So as a teacher, to ensure the inclusive education and the because if we practice the inclusive education in classroom, this is the way our society can be inclusive. And we should ask again and again and again, as educators, what are our contribution to make our society inclusive? Is our society inclusive? If our society is not inclusive, our students are not bringing the inclusive idea in classroom. So the onus is on us, that how we introduce even the concept of the diversity, the concept of inclusivity, and seeing that we all look same, but that doesn't mean that we don't have diverse thoughts. That is also very important. So I always make this conversation even with my Australian colleagues or American colleagues, that our British colleagues, that in our classrooms, apparently we can see the diversity because our students look very different, right? So our challenge is different to make sure the inclusivity. Then your students, when you go to a classroom, you think everybody looks same, racially. But that doesn't mean your classroom is not diverse. So equity and equality is so important. So you need to think that, can you see this particular picture? I really love it. It's not about, making equality, and equity is the next step. But actually, we should all go towards inclusion where there is no sort of, the wall. So it is accessible to everyone as the owners, and the onus is on us. And it should start from the content designing, what we are teaching them, how we are teaching them. And that's where these premises should come, that respect, reciprocity, and shared responsibility. And the respect is nothing else than an attitude, how we are actually perceiving. And can you remember the question I said that I don't want to answer, but I'm just posing you about the cultural biases? That actually connects to the respect. What attitude we are bringing to class, how we are seeing the class. And the moment you see that and think that, all right, I will be very kind, I'm very sensitive, and as a teacher, I don't have any bias. The moment you are doing that, the moment you are actually leaving the aspect of respect, that attitude at home, and going there to classroom with the savior concept where it has everything, then respect. So you lack that attitude. And the reciprocity is the mode of interacting using respect, which will give your students a space to share what they're bringing. The moment we think that, all right, we are teaching our student, that moment we actually leave the respect at home and the idea of reciprocity at home, and we are going there thinking that we know everything. As teachers, the best thing we can do to show our students that we have vulnerability and we learn from each other. The moment you show your vulnerability, the students will trust you more. The moment you show your vulnerability, your students will be empowered because they will not pretend that they know everything. They will have the courage to show their vulnerability. And the moment all of us start showing our vulnerability, we create a safe space and we create a mode of interaction which actually based on respect and reciprocity, and that's where the shared responsibility will come. A process, this is a process and the outcome. So as an educator, your idea should be, you know, not taking all the loads, rather share the loads. But you can't tell your students, let's teach together. We can't do it, right? But teach together coming from the way we practice our pedagogical ideas and what pedagogical philosophy you are bringing. And that is really very important. And this is a very funny thing I created. I call it AUIU tips. It's like, the vowel tips. Remember that diversity is the art of thinking independently, yet together. Diversity is not just, we are different, we are similar. It's the art of thinking independently, but together. And these tips might help you. And I'm happy to share with all of you, if you ever need those, as long as you acknowledge that. Just before I finish, I will share two things with you. A couple of years back, I started doing a postdoctorate fellowship, and as part of that fellowship, I had to write my teaching philosophy. And when I started doing that, I thought, oh, I have been teaching for last 20 years. I know what I'm doing, and it's just 500 words teaching philosophy. I'll be fine. I'll do that. And then I started writing it, and I realized that as teachers, we do so many other things, but we don't reflect often the way we teach, the way we actually interact. So always, time to time, uh, take a step back and think that how we can actually, what philosophy we are bringing and what other things we are bringing. Now, at the beginning of the session, Dr. Shamsad Murtaja was jokingly telling me that while we are waiting, why don't you sing? I was actually not planning to sing, but bringing those aspects, but I can sing as well. But, as teachers, I often, even in Australian classroom, I often bring my idea or my sort of context of, the very basic philosophy which my Bengali culture teaches me, that if we think of, all the holy books in the world, be it Holy Quran, Holy Bible, Gita, Veda, or, the Torah, whatever it is, every single holy books in the world talks about know thyself. What does it mean? Know yourself the best. And my whole session, plenary session, was actually talking about bringing our own intersectional identity and positionality into classroom. And often in classroom, when I teach my students identity, I share that, how Lalon said, বাড়ির কাছে আরশিনগর, বাড়ির কাছে আরশিনগর, সেথা এক পড়শি বসত করে, আমি একদিনও না দেখিলাম তারে. That very, very person, the superpower, he lives in us, but we don't get to see them. Ravi Thakur said the same thing. কেন মাঝে মাঝে তব দেখা পাই চিরদিন কেন পাই না নজরুল said the same thing আমার আপনার চেয়ে আপন যে জন খুঁজি তারে আমি আপনার with this note I will say as teachers let's from today onwards let's think of know thyself and let's use that as one of our teaching pedagogy teaching philosophy that once we know ourselves the best got that let's bring it on and let's be inclusive and let's use that secret ingredient in our own unique way and let's make our teaching practices a fun one. Thank you so much for listening.